And if you're here on Zoom, then welcome. You can hang out with us. And if you've got any questions that you'd like us to answer a little bit later, then you can put them in the Q&A box or in the chat box. I'll be keeping my eye on those. And if you're joining us via YouTube, hi there, say hello. And also, if you want to pop a question in the chat box, we can address it later. For once, all the technology is working as predicted. I'm stunned. And maybe I'm cursing myself by saying that. But hey, Carter, can we just test your mic real quick?
Yeah, how's that sound?
Beautiful. Welcome. Chris is here and says he doesn't see anyone else.
Or maybe
oh, that's what he means, like people haven't come in yet. Yeah, no problem, Chris. People are filing in because I need to let them in, I think. Got a few coming in. So welcome. Yeah, welcome, Bill. Good to see you, and Marissa and David. Thanks for coming and hanging out with us tonight. This is Made in LA, and Skylight Books present Art of Transformation. We have the editors and contributors to this volume of short stories here tonight, and we have a bookseller from Skylight Books to welcome us and kick us off. So Eve, why don't you get us started?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Eve, and I'm a bookseller at Skylight, and we're happy to be virtually hosting Made in LA Volume 3. Skylight Books is an independent bookstore located in the neighborhood of Los Feliz, and you can check out our upcoming events on our podcast page. I'm going to put it in the messages section. We also do a podcast that we update weekly, and you can check us out on Spotify or wherever podcasts are streamed. And yeah, thank you for joining us. Skylight is getting ready for the holiday season, so we recently published the holiday catalog that we publish every year, and that's on our Tumblr. I'm just inundating you with links. Yeah. Do y'all have any questions for me?
Eve, I was thinking about it. As we were planning this event, we were remembering our debut last year at Skylight, and we had, I think, maybe like 10 of the contributors together, all in a line, and each of us talking for a little bit about our stories, and taking questions from the audience. And that event was a lot of fun. I know that like live events aren't really possible at the moment. So what is it like in the bookstore at this time? Like, have people's reading habits changed? Like, what's happening?
I mean, there's definitely been a pivot towards texts that deal with race and class inequality. There's been a noticeable change in our monthly bestsellers in terms of what people are buying. But I think Skylight in particular, we're pretty lucky that we're still open. We're still open for browsing, and people have been supporting us online as well. So we're pretty lucky. We also changed our focus to online events. So that's been going pretty well. We've been hosting events every week, and we've also been producing podcasts, which is exciting. That's definitely something that we were doing before the pandemic, but now it's something that we're like really focusing our energy on. Yeah, the community's still there, it's still strong, it's just not physical, which is fine.
So we've got a question in the audience from Bill Loving about Made in LA Volume 3, and he asks, is it still in stock now at Skylight? I just dropped off about 8 copies for consignment earlier this week, so I'm assuming they're not all sold out. I hope, but maybe they are.
They should be in stock. If they're not in stock, we can always get more. Yeah.
Yeah, so you could order those online or you could walk in because the bookstore is open, and great place to do holiday shopping.
Definitely. One thing that we are recommending is that people get their holiday shopping done early, especially with the pandemic and how that's affecting shipment and book production. We suggest doing it early. But yeah, I'll let Allison take it away.
Thanks. Let me put myself on spotlight here. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So this is actually our second annual tour of Skylight Books, as Cody was mentioning. Back in the pre-COVID days, I know we hardly remember what that feels like. We had quite the crowd at that event, and it was fantastic. We met quite a lot of people who were interested in being a part of this anthology series. And a few of them are even featured in this anthology, which is very exciting to know that, you know, it's the thing that people are excited about and you want to share your stories. And it's such a great opportunity to do this book tour with our local bookstores, because this is an anthology about Los Angeles, and so we are supporting local bookstores. We encourage you very much to do that as well. So a little background about who we are. I'll try to make this brief. And it must have been maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we started this anthology series, and we started with volume 1, Stories Rooted in the City of Angels. The year later, we came out with volume 2, Chasing the Elusive Dream. And then now we have volume 3, Art of Transformation. So it's very exciting that we now have a collection of books, and they're all available online. They're all through our Made in LA writers.com website. And then you can also go to any of the local bookstores in Los Angeles. And if it's not on the shelves, you can request for it to be brought to the store. So we very much encourage you guys to do that. So we are just a collective of local authors who are excited to share stories about Los Angeles, inspired by Los Angeles. Most of us either we grew up here, we spent a lot of time here. We may not be in LA any longer, but LA very much inspires our creativity. So we're very excited to share that with everybody. So I'd like to kick it off. For our first author, our first contributor is Andrea Otten. It's her first story in our anthology series, and we're very excited to have her be part of volume 3. And her story is called Empty Glass. It is a dizzying and relatable story about a woman who is caught in the disillusionment of the life in LA and only sees what she has lost, not what she still has, until a party in Silver Lake becomes the turning point in her life. It's a very LA relatable story. So I am going to find you, and I'm going to set it off to Andrea. Welcome.
Hi everybody, and thank you so much for being here. And I want to thank Cody and the team, and also Eve and Skylight Books. I think the last time I was in Skylight was to see Lydia Yuknovich read, and I can't even tell you what time of year that was prior to COVID. It just feels like a lifetime away. But I really love your bookstore, and this story is inspired, you know, kind of nearby. So I do want to talk about some of the inspirations, some of the places and the observations of LA that helped create the story. But I love California sunsets since I was really young. I like that wash of color that sort of bronzes the land. And these sunsets are an exotic wonder to a Midwesterner, which I am one. But I've been here for a while, and I always say this, I really love this town. I love Los Angeles. But I've also witnessed or known people affected by stories that are so big, as if a story like that happened where I'm from in small town America, I'm from a small city, it would be the #1 story, headline news, and everybody would be talking about it. But out here, there are nonstop, stunning stories every day. You know, it's LA, right? You either flourish or you fall. So I have one such story, and it is, I'm going to read a little bit of what I've written here. It's alive news story, and it made me wonder just how much beauty could be backed up against the ugly, hard reality of Los Angeles. And what do we look away from, and who gets lost? So that's really what's happening in my story, Empty Glass. And the first line says that Izzy was the life of the party before she was the death of it. So I have a little bit of writing here and explanation as I go. So again, as she said, around Silver Lake, in one of those mid-century homes that has like the grotto in the background and the big pool, Izzy, the character named Izzy, is struggling to be seen, to be heard, to be cared about, to have anybody even pay any attention to her. And she's among these hip, sort of sultry-skinned partiers that are a common thing that we see in LA. And she has even left her pit bull rescue in her SUV because she just thinks the dog always steals all the attention. But she could see her audience waning, tongue drying out. She flipped up a wait a minute finger and stopped to take the last swig. The gin pickled her tongue as she swilled it down a tired throat. And denied connection, Izzy heads to this local mercado, these little stores at the end of the street where you can get more alcohol. But on the way, a tall, lean woman with a serpent tattoo stands under a melon streetlight, and they talk, and it quickly turns really intense. And I've seen that over and over again at dog parks, particularly in Pasadena. And it was just, I don't know if it's the tension of the long day, the commute that we used to have before COVID. And honestly, maybe some selfishness. I've really been trying to observe, but they come to blows. And Midwestern dogs, by the way, are really different from LA dogs. And I suppose it's because of the people and the pressure, I don't know. But later in the story, when Izzy's overwhelmed, her decision to hand the dog over to the stranger helps her kind of lead the way into the next phase where things really change for her. So she couldn't even handle a poor defenseless dog. Now she'd face the night alone. Fresh sobs blurred her vision as she eased onto the 5. So the 5 North, where this becomes the story, is out where the 405, the 102, the 118 interchange are. There's a street that's way down below, and that's where the real life story meets with this fictional character, Izzy. The 5 arched upward into the purpling sky above an interstate crossing underneath it. She pulled over to the guardrail and wept in convulsive bursts. How was life so impossible? What was wrong with her? She pounded the steering wheel and asked the roof, why? I wanted to examine the view from up there, looking down, what this experience would be like her at this guardrail, the whooshing cars coming by, the loud sounds, the intense energy she would have been feeling. High above the city lights, she was drawn to the sky, millions of flickers hovering between earth and air, like arriving planes coasting low over LA. Then looking down on all those shining orbs, lighting up the city's magnificent grid of car rivers rushing in a red and white glow. I'll leave you with that image. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. I had actually a quick question for you because I was really stuck on, what you said about coming from the Midwest. It's kind of that whole big fish in a small pond versus small fish in a big pond. Do you find that it's harder to find big stories in a big town like this? Because you said small town, big stories seem magnificent, but what's the difference there?
I've really pondered that because if a car turned over, on its end, and if a person was killed, unfortunately, that would be the whole world of the city where I'm from. But out here, I've driven by such a thing, and we just keep going. So, because we have to, for one thing, but I mean, because there's so much that it's like you say, what would you pick? I think that the stories that are bigger are usually very, very emotive or just horrifying. Sometimes there are stories of joy that we need, but it's usually the way dramatic is what I've noticed. I don't know what you think, but it just seems like the higher the drama, the more we're drawn to it.
That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. We're grateful to have you on our anthology. And this is your first story, right?
The first
Published?
The first fiction story. I have had creative nonfiction, but it's the first fiction story. Yeah, I mean, I don't even think about that. That's really exciting.
Yes, that is really exciting. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. All right. So our next contributor, A.S. Youngless, she had a story with us in the second anthology. We're really grateful to have her back again. I love the way she writes. Her story is called Unwanted Gifts. And it's an urban fiction meets paranormal when a neighborhood that is caught in a cycle of hardship is torn apart by an exciting yet unexpected arrival. So I'm going to pass it off to A.S. Youngless. And I think you there you go.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you everyone from Made in LA and from Skylight Books for hosting this event. Yes, I set my story in my neighborhood of West Adams because while I love moving around LA and it's so big, there's always something to see. So it doesn't matter. There's always something to see. There's places, even after 9 years, that I want to see. They're on my massive list that I have not gotten to because it's just so wide and expansive. But I wanted to set something in West Adams. Just this is the LA I know the best. My neighborhood, my neighbors in the street, being themselves, playing too many different music. I've often joked that it depends on what side of my apartment you're on is what music you're listening to. It could be metal, it could be easy listening, it could be rap, you don't know. It could be all at the same time. But when I wrote Unwanted Gifts, I was just going through this Twilight Zone phase. I love old Twilight Zone. I love the newer stuff as well, but just there's something special about the original series back in the day in black and white and how they used weird and strange happenings just to talk about humanity and talk about community and behavior and how something like in Unwanted Gifts, something so small and seemingly unimportant can just turn everybody's actions in how they're talking to each other. And there's a scene, and I didn't mark it, so I apologize, but there's a scene that was probably the first thing that I started talking about. Outside behind my apartment, there's a dumpster, like many apartment buildings, but there is a group of my neighbors who love to hang out by the dumpster. This is their go-to spot. It has more to do with the fact of the location is between two main streets, so you don't have to worry about major traffic. On major holidays, it's a block party. There's tents and barbecue and whatever, but even on just a good day, the first day that's warm outside, they're always out there. And I was writing and they were just so loud with all of their different musics. That day, they all had different music on. But I just, looking at them and seeing how they are sitting next to this dumpster, because it was summer when I wrote it and it was hot. But everybody, you just go to them. I mean, when I'm outside, I stop by and say hi. And when I was teaching my son to ride a bicycle, we rode by and said hi. And that is just this heart of my little community, this tiny little part of Los Angeles. And then taking the idea of the Twilight Zone as something bizarre and supernatural. And then setting it here, and instead of, like Andrea was saying, instead of that Midwestern setting, instead of that small town, having it be in Los Angeles, having it be in the streets that you saw in the LA riots in '92. That's my area. And having this group of people who very much are part of each other's lives suddenly turn on each other because they don't understand. And I think that's a very human thing. It's not my neighborhood thing. That's just a human thing. When you don't have that, what is this? What's the answer? When you don't have facts or something like facts that you can pretend are facts, something tangible to hold on to, it can go from great to not great really, really fast. And I will read, because the part I did have marked open is the moment where things begin to change, when the object, the thing is what I call it in the book, when that pops up. And it's about a girl, a brother and a sister named Charlie and May, and they're just walking home. And as they're walking home, Charlie, who's the little brother, is going on and on about Fortnite and how much he loves it, when everything goes wrong. And this is that paragraph. It's, I was about to tell Charlie he was nuts if he thought mom would waste that much cash when the sky got really bright, too bright. Like someone inflated the sun until the thin film holding it together burst open. Daggers of light shot out, a million points in all directions. I covered my eyes to keep from burning my retinas. Then, just as quickly as the brightness appeared, it was gone. When I lowered my arm, everything was the same as before. Sirens warbled on La Cienega. The 10 freeway buzzed like a hive a mile up the road. Jackhammers slammed into old foundations for the new condos no one wanted built. A crush of bodies blocked the center of Bowdoin Avenue next to the ripe dumpster. Everything was as normal and right as rain, except for what was resting on the toe of my shoe. What was that, May? Charlie asked, eyes on the sky. Don't know, Charlie. I replied, looking at my foot. It was the size of an orange, a little smaller than the size of my palm, with a smooth brown glass dome on one end and spiky fingers on the other. I blinked 3 or 4 times and kneeled. Maybe it was a toy, but it hadn't been there before the flash. At least I hadn't noticed it until afterwards. And from that moment on, they take that object and they start asking people, what is this? But wherever they go, everything stops working, including communication. So take it up and you can read the rest. Thank you, Allison, and everyone.
Thanks, Ayus. I have a quick follow-up question for you. I love that you're the kind of writer who likes to look outside the window and find inspiration. Do you find a lot of your stories that way, or do you ever spend any time dreaming of some faraway land?
Both. I love people watching. I've always loved people watching, as long as I can remember, from being a kid in the 80s and sitting in the mall and watching just hordes, because in the 80s, that's how it was, hordes of people with everything. And, you know, and I just like watching interactions. I love watching the guys. As ridiculous as it sounds, but they're so passionate, and they have this like this little, when everything happened with COVID and everybody went inside, they didn't. And we're like, oh my God, what are you doing? They don't have masks. Why don't they go inside? They're always just with them. So in a way, they were quarantining just right outside. But they have these passionate arguments about so much stuff. And I think you could find that anywhere. Like, I'm a horrible eavesdropper, and it's a family trait. My mom does that too, but my mom answers. my mom will answer questions from the table over at the restaurant. It has nothing to do with her, but I mean, like, I love listening. I like listening to the tone. I love listening to the words people use. I like watching their interaction. Where are their hands? Are they down? Are they clenched up? So I like using that. And then I do love strange worlds. So I like to take that and then drop it in other places. Or like even a science fiction world. I like to take something, because humanity is humanity. Humans are human. That psychology, I feel, you can drop somewhere else. And then, well, what's going to happen now that we're here and this and this and this and this is happening? What can go wrong? As Rosalind said the last time, what can go wrong? And yeah.
Nice. I love that. You learn a lot about writing characters just by being a nosy eavesdropper. That's kind of one of the fun, and then you can pass it off. No, I'm a writer. It's fine. I'm not just being creepy. um, all right. So our next contributor is Barry Bergman, and he is calling in from all the way in Japan. That's very exciting. His short story is called Terminal Flight, which is a gripping tale that echoes a vintage LA in a fresh way about two detectives determined to solve the mystery of an airborne murder. So I'm going to pass it off to Barry. Hey, Barry.
Hello. Oh, konnichiwa.
Oh, I need to put you on a spotlight. Here we go. All right.
So konnichiwa from Tokyo. So thank you very much for letting me be on here. And Cody, thanks a lot for organizing this. And Skylight Books, thank you for letting me be a part of this. And I hope you sell a lot of books. But my tale is somewhat, well, it is from an older part of LA. My family, my grandfather brought his young daughter and young wife to Los Angeles from San Francisco after the earthquake, thinking that there would be less earthquakes in Los Angeles. He obviously did not do his research very well. My father was born in 1910, and I was born in Los Angeles, and my son, who is the fourth generation in Los Angeles, and he lives, frankly, by one of the scenes that I wrote about, LAX. He is a pilot, newly married, so hopefully we will soon have a fifth generation Bergman living in the Los Angeles area. But I've always been fascinated with LA. Certainly my piece is a period piece of particularly 1962. It's, if you want to put it in a genre, it's called a police procedural. But what I tried to do is make it sort of a mashup between a hard-boiled and a noir mystery, and utilize what I know, which is Los Angeles, even though I've lived in Tokyo for 20 years. Until the COVID outbreak, I get back about every couple of months or so. So, you know, I wanted to use the locales and talk and have LA be actually a character. Include things like, things we take for granted, freeways, beaches. The smog in 1962 was very smoggy. And of course, you can't forget the Dodgers. And it was an era too when we called freeways by names. The 110 was the Harbor Freeway. The 10 was the San Bernardino Freeway, and the 710 was the Long Beach Freeway. So what I wanted to do is, it's a story about, a dead guy. The cops talk to witnesses. The detectives find resolution. And I just wanted to read you a short piece as my two main characters, Sergeant Parnell and Detective Ed Harbaugh, arrive at LAX airport after they get a call. And the narrative is by Parnell. As we parked in front of the Blue Sky terminal, the warm sun and ocean breeze had put my moodiness on the back burner. Ed pulled the LA police placard from the sun visor and put it on the dash. Looking like the cops we were, we hurried into the terminal. Blue Sky was a big airline, and around this time of the evening, 6 o'clock, its terminal was full of business travelers just getting home. Harbaugh and I waded upstream through the suits and briefcases until we reached gate 42, the second on the left along the concourse. The gate area was a cluster of cops, airline employees, and fire department rescue teams. I easily figured out who the senior uniform was because he was the only one getting bitched at by all the others. The burly sergeant had busy eyes and a nose that was too big, even for his broad face. The set of his pencil-thin mustache let me know he was glad detectives had arrived to share some of the responsibility. I forced my way into the knot of folks around him and said, for all to hear, "Detective Sergeant Parnell, Detective Harbaugh here is my partner. Fill us in." I said this as I indicated that the sergeant should follow us to the airplane. I could see the relief in his eyes as he introduced himself. "Sergeant Hastings, 17th Precinct. Glad to see you guys here. I was getting a bit tired of crowd control." "Sergeant Hastings, what do you know that we don't?" I asked. "That should be a lot since we don't know anything." Hastings talked as we entered the airplane. "Probably not much more than you guys. Nothing happened until the plane arrived and all the passengers left. The stewardess, Carol, noticed that the victim seemed to be sleeping after everyone else got off. When she went over to wake him up, she could tell he wasn't breathing. She figured out real fast what was going on. That's when we got the call from the airline dispatcher. We followed Hastings' gaze to the gentleman calm repose, leaning his head against the window. If we hadn't known he was dead, we might have thought it was just another guy who had too many martinis on an empty stomach and nodded off. I should add, too, that I spent 35 years in the airline industry. And although it may sound morbid, the inspiration for this story was periodically, not every day, not every month, but passengers did die on airplanes. And so usually by natural causes. But I just thought, well, I wonder what would it be like if there was something behind this, maybe probably a crime or something. But you know, a thing that I tried to run through the story too is how circumstances change people, and in the words of the anthology, transform people. And that's kind of what I tried to write about with Sergeant Parnell. But that's the story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thanks, Barry. I had a quick note. You reminded me of my dad because he used to always call the freeways by name as well, and it would drive me crazy. Get on the Hollywood freeway.
I still call them by names, but you know, in those days, like in '62, they had multiple numbers. They hadn't defined one number for one of them, so that's the only way people knew what they were.
Time's fast. Thank you so much, Barry. All right. Now, let me get this going here. Great. So next is one of our lovely editors and founders of Made in LA, Cody Cisco. He has written a story called Call Us Home, which is a supernatural thriller that makes us question if this melting pot of cultures also creates the perfect cauldron for nefarious mythical forces as the LA apocalypse threatens to turn the whole city into darkness. So I am going to pass this spooky microphone over to our spooky writer. Go for it. Wait for it. Here we go. Take it away, Cody.
Thanks, Allison. So it is Friday the 13th, and this is 2020. So basically, I'm extending all of the spooky vibe from October up until the end of the year. Like, I don't think there's a need to transition to like happy Hollywood times. I'm just going to keep it real dark. So I wrote Call Us Home. It was around this time last year, and I think there was like a huge windstorm that maybe kicked it off for me, where, you know, so often our weather here is just idyllic and, you know, it's warm during the day, and then, you know, it's not really ever cold. It's not what other parts of the country would call cold, at least. And then there was this one day where just like, you know, palm fronds are dropping from the trees, and like the gutters are just full of leaves. And when that happens, there's so much dust around here because it hasn't rained in 6 months that it just like, it fills the air and things get weird. And, you know, a lot of authors have written about the Santa Anas and, you know, Joan Didion, Raymond Carver, sorry. That, you know, I wasn't necessarily trying to like be part of that, but like, you know, when we're inspired by something, we kind of have to run with it. So I wrote Call Us Home, which is really like a patchwork vortex. It's a little bit tricky because I included 5 different points of view in a short story, which most writers would tell you, like, don't do that. That's crazy. Don't try to do that. And I was like, well, okay, I'll take that as a challenge. But so it starts off with the character of Luis, who is a guy who goes overlooked most of the time. You know, he jokes that, in school, other students got more attention, both positive and negative, as he plodded forward, earning C's and B's. Sometimes he had to correct his teachers, who tended to mark him absent by default. So, you know, he introduces himself. I'm Luis. I'm nobody. Don't worry about it. And the problem is he has this supernatural cloak, and he doesn't know where it came from. He's not even really sure what it is. It's took another kind of eerie, spooky person in LA to explain it to him, which is, it's so often the case that we figure out LA by what other people tell us it is, and then try to sort of triangulate from there. But anyway, Luis is, he's on Hollywood Boulevard. He's going to this bar to pick up something for his friend. And I'll read you just a very short scene from that. A block off Hollywood Boulevard, Luis intersects a red carpet stained by heavy use and a bouncer with a cannabis stare. The line for a Pretty Laundry private event has glam young things busy taking selfies and texting friends. They have no idea what life has in store for them. Luis slips past the Pretty Laundry lineup and the bouncer, unnoticed. When the door swings open in front of him and disgorges two stumbling white chicks, he moves inside. The bar is decorated with over-the-top Orientalism, red paper lanterns from IKEA, paw-waving Lucky Buddha statues, and conical hats that look highly flammable. Whoever planned the decor is highlighting the fact that the Oscars nominated a rom-com written and directed by a Taiwanese woman for Best Picture, which is worth celebrating, but this isn't the right way to do it. Culture fail, he thinks. Someone's going to cancel this place fast. Catching the actor/model/bartender's attention is a challenge. Luis ducks under the bar flap, catches a firm bicep, and asks for the thing Salt asked him to pick up. It takes a few repetitions of, "I'm Luis, I'm here for Salt's thing," to get through to the dude. Eventually, he hands over a small, sparkle-flecked gift bag with the heft of a mason jar that sloshes heavily, thickly. And if you want to know what's in that jar, or what else bad can happen to people like Luis when the LA apocalypse begins to creep in, you should probably read Call Us Home in Made in LA Volume 3.
Thanks, Cody. You do what I really enjoyed about the story was how you just took things that felt so familiar in LA and then you made it really dark and horrible.
Oh, like the bus.
I love that about you.
There's a scene on the bus, and I won't say anything more except that, like, ick.
So what about LA inspires you to write, inspires a supernatural vibe? And do you think it would work somewhere else?
Yeah, I think what makes for a creepy vibe is different in different places, and that's why you get these like haunted house horror stories from, like, say, New England or even the Midwest. It's like these large mansions where creepy things happen. But what I like about writing horror here in LA is that there is, on the surface, what seems to be just a lovely life. There's the sunshine, there's the nice things. There's people who like go out of their way to look like real beautiful, however they define that. And I think this is something that even noir authors have exploited for years, is that there is this dark side to things, and even in the bright sunlight, you can find really horrible things. And so I guess that's part of what inspires me, is this idea that, like, yeah, even beautiful things can be corrupted.
Nice.
Or corrupting.
Corrupting. Awesome. Thanks so much, Cody. I believe we're having a brief intermission. Is that?
Yeah, if I look here at my show notes, it looks like Gaby is going to kick off the second half with a couple words.
Great. Thank you, Cody and Allison. I wanted to thank everyone for tuning in, whether it's live or later. And I also want you to, if you're local, please, every year it's important to support your small businesses, but this year it's like super duper important. Please support Skylight Books. If they're not in your neighborhood and you want to shop at another independent bookstore, check with them. Hopefully they're carrying our anthologies. If not now, then soon. And just keep that in mind, shop with your, vote with your money now that we're done voting at the booth. So anyway, we just wanted to also, express our appreciation to Skylight. We did have a wonderful time there last year. We'd love to go back when it's safe, but for now we're really excited to be able to do this in our sweatpants with our wine. You know, you gotta be grateful for what you have when you have it. So so I did write a story for volume 3, and it is called Star-Crossed. It's the story of two friends and their very interesting connection. It's set mostly in LA, but also they had become friends in Costa Mesa. And the symbol that I chose to research and highlight that I wanted to mention in this particular talk is water, because a lot of the story takes place around the ocean. A lot of the memories are wrapped up in those old days of youth at the beach, doing the things that young people do, hanging out. I looked up water symbolism, and the first thing I saw was the word transformation. And I was like, yes, I'm on the right path. And then I did a little digging. I know that it has a link to the unconscious mind. I wonder, I'll throw this question out. I tend to have really good, vivid, interesting dreams when it rains here in LA. It never happened when I lived in the South and it rained every day, but it happens here. And once in a while, I'll have a dream that involves someone who's alive and very much a part of my life now. And other times I'll have a very interesting dream about someone who has passed on, who is visiting, one might say, or reminding me of times past. And so ideas about this, the dreams that the character has, the question she has about why, and what kind of connection does she have to this guy over all of these decades, it plays out, and I hope it's interesting. I hope it captures your imagination like it captured mine. In my research about water, I found out that oceans are equated with chaos. They are boundless and ungovernable. I found that to be a really good symbol for a lot of things in life. And also it ties in with the zodiac. And there are 4 elements. I'm not sure if you all know this, but Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces are the water signs. And I got this quote when I was researching. I thought it was pretty interesting. Astrologically speaking, water symbolizes layers and undercurrents. If you don't look closely, you're likely to miss important matters about these people. The spirit has also a propensity to naturally see what others overlook completely, which may make some people uncomfortable. Be prepared for the unanticipated, startling observations. So I was excited to see that all of these themes tied in with the setting that I had chosen from my short story. And I wanted to bring it up as just a little tutorial about dreams and water and the unconscious and how things connect. I think as writers, we all have to connect with the flow of something in order to get our ideas and get them coherent and on the page. So with that, I'm going to transition over to our next presenter, who is Carter Mycroft. He has a story it's called Shark News, and it is not exactly on the same level as mine as far as going into the deep unconscious, but it is pretty thrilling. The tagline is an unemployed young man finds opportunity in an unexpected place. So Carter, would you like to tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gaby, and thanks everybody. Yeah, so I was at the one of the launch events last year, which was kind of my introduction to Made in LA, and I met Cody and Gaby and Allison and Sarah there, and they talked a little bit then about the theme for this issue, which is the art of transformation. And I don't know, like I thought that was a really compelling theme for me. in a few ways that I tried to get at when I wrote my story for this volume. My story is called Shark News, like Gaby mentioned, and it's basically about a guy who moves to Venice for no reason and gets involved in things that seem strange at first and ended up being like a lot stranger than he thought initially. And there's a lot of transformations that happen that I tried to work into the story. There's obviously like the main character's arc, which is like probably the most normal character arc I've ever written. I mean, it's about like an aimless young person who kind of finds a calling, I guess. And then there's the transformation of the neighborhood and the city that I kind of tried to work in. But the transformation that I think is probably the most compelling that I wanted to talk about really briefly right now is this kind of idea of the world leaving people behind, I guess is how I would call it. So one of the main characters in the story, his name is Mike, and he basically runs a radio program that is obsessively dedicated to sharks and like shark attacks, shark sightings, shark biology all up and down California. And he like relays all this news on a shortwave radio broadcast that no one listens to. And he's like not even really aware that no one listens to it. And there's like this whole like intrigue about like him getting screwed out of a real radio show by his family and like things happen there. But I think the thing about his character that was my initial idea when I first heard the theme of this volume that I was like, that's what I want to write about, is this idea of like the world transforming too fast for some people. And it's like this really sad idea and this really compelling idea that I think a city like LA that is constantly like changing and is thought of as being like at the forefront of culture and the forefront of technology and like full of trendsetters and influencers and all this stuff. And it's like, that stuff's really cool. Like that's part of what attracted me to move here 5 years ago. But what about the people who are completely disconnected from all that is something that I think about all the time. And I think a lot about the internet because I'm like a very online person. And like when I see people like my parents and my grandparents who are still in 2020 adjusting to a very like cyber age, so to speak, it's like it's very sad and like very compelling to me. So I'll read like a quick little passage of my story and maybe you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about. So this is the main character, Hunter, going into work for Mike, who's got this like crazy like thrown together radio program. One morning, feeling particularly energized, he decided to bring his laptop to the shed. He'd worked up some social media for Shark News in his spare time. Part of his job was to expand their audience, after all. He figured he'd start small and ease Mike into it, since the old man seemed pretty stuck in his ways. That afternoon, once the news was all ready and the broadcast was planned out, he pulled out his computer. So here's something I've been working on, basically exploring an online presence. I think it'll help us reach new listeners. Mike frowned. Hunter half expected him to ask what online meant. After a long silence, he motioned for Hunter to proceed. He opened the browser. So this is our Twitter. So we've got a little logo, a few posts, just letting people know when we're on the air and stuff. I also followed a few shark accounts you might like. He paused to gauge Mike's reaction. The old man's eyes were as wide as two skillets. He gave the hardest blink ever performed by a human being and leaned close to the screen. This is who we follow? Yeah, you can get news really fast on here, faster than the fax machine. And this is who sees us. Right. I was thinking we can build up our Twitter and Facebook and then start posting episodes like a podcast. I think people could get super into it. We could even post some of the backlog as special episodes or, God damn it, Hard Nose. Mike sprang up, red in the face, his jaw hung open and a vein throbbed in his neck. What the hell are you thinking? Hunter steps back, heart pounding. Mike had never gotten angry before. Now he was furious. I thought you wanted to expand our audience. Did I say we were doing that now? You said it was part of my job. Not like this, God damn it. So that's like a little snippet of like kind of what I wanted to get at with the story. Basically just this idea that
the world moves too fast for some people, and it's not necessarily their fault. And I feel like so many people in a city that moves as fast as LA just get like totally left behind, left in the dirt, and are just like bewildered by what's like to us, I guess, more millennial, Gen X, whatever you want to call it, people who like are very comfortable with the current pace of things. Um, it's like very natural to us. And I think that it's something that people don't talk about. And I think that there's a lot of work that we can do kind of intergenerationally to try and like bridge these gaps and do things a little more productively and avoid these situations. And also like after this in the story, like Mike ends up making Hunter go like break into a radio station and set up a bunch of illegal equipment and like get chased by a security guard, and then possibly goes and kills his own son. So the story's not really about that, but that was just kind of like part of what inspired me, and I thought I'd ramble about it right now. So yeah, that's my thing.
Well, I really appreciate that you brought that issue up of people being left behind. I think that's very pertinent in a normal city in the U.S., and it's extremely pertinent here. So so very well, very good. Thank you, Carter. I'm going to introduce Miss Rosalind Tukolsky next. Rosalind has written a story called Tell Me Your Name. A young woman in Pasadena reconstructs a night when things went horribly wrong. Rosalind's signature question to ask, as we found out from our book launch, is what could go wrong? So please take it away, Rosalind.
Hello, everybody. Well, I came to Los Angeles from Ithaca, New York, which is a small college town, so different from Los Angeles. It was moving into another world when I came to live in Pasadena. The weather in Ithaca is extremely brutal. Homeless people do not gravitate there. And in Ithaca, everybody has a snow shovel. And in Los Angeles, everybody has a screenplay. My husband has a big family here, and all his cousins have a screenplay, and they're hoping to make it big. So for my story, Tell Me Your Name, the spark came from an afternoon when I was sitting in a condo in Pasadena. I'm very fortunate. I live in a lovely place. And it was a ring at my doorbell. And when I went to the door, there was a young man, very young, 17, maybe 17, who said he'd lost his job. He hadn't eaten for 2 days. He was starving. Could I help him out? And I'd never met a homeless person before. Maybe he was scamming me, but I felt really bad, and I said, sure. I left him at the door. I went, I got some money. I came back, I took his hand, I pressed it into his hand, and I said, good luck. I hope your day improves. That was it. Shut the door, went back to reading the book I was reading. And when I told people the story, their reactions were horrified. How could you leave him standing at the door with the door open, come into your apartment? He could have harmed you. He could have killed you. He could have come in and stolen everything in the apartment. And I thought, gee, at the time, you always have to make snap decisions. Your judgments are reflexive. And I thought about this and I said, gee, something sure could have gone wrong. And I thought I'd write it as a short story. But it didn't sit right with me because I didn't like the idea of having, the homeless person comes in and kills the owner of the house and steals stuff. So I thought it would be more interesting to have a young person, someone the same age as the homeless person, living in a really beautiful place. And these two teenagers, same age, but from different worlds, meet each other. And then I thought, okay, I'll write a young adult story. I had never tried young adult. as a genre. I write adult crime fiction and thrillers, but I thought, let's try this because it appealed to me to have a really young person having to deal with this. And that didn't sit right with me either. And I thought to myself, what if, as soon as the guy rings the doorbell, he puts himself in danger because she's the creepy one and something bad can happen from her. And that's how I got the spark for Tell Me Your Name. So I'm going to read a quick part here. The night after this young man comes to the door, she tells her parents about it because she's young, she's 15, and she tells them what happened. And this is their reaction. You did what? Melinda, who always speaks to me in a loving tone of controlled patience, has lost the plot and is screaming like me, like I gave away the clock. He was poor, Mom. I gave him some of my allowance. Your mother's right, Clark says, and I don't say that often. You realize that we could have been robbed blind? Why, I say, because he's poor? She throws up both her hands. Pamela, for someone whose IQ is off the charts, you are incredibly obtuse. The last two words are yelled into my ear. Your impulse to help someone less fortunate than you is great, Clark says, but you must have some sense of self-preservation. You didn't know this person. He could have harmed you. Yeah, I bet he's imagining some pretty embarrassing headlines. Intruder decapitates philanthropist's daughter. Melinda is still going all psycho-demented. He probably climbed right over the no trespassing sign. Our neighbors would go insane if you heard if they heard that you encouraged them. Why did I tell them? Because I thought they'd be proud of me in a weird kind of way, like all their homeschool values paid off. What about the Pope, I say? We recently heard the Pope talking on NPR about how to solve the problem of panhandlers. You give money to every single one of them, the Pope says, whether they fit your idea of who should be begging or not. And you must also make some physical connection, touch their hand or look at them, make eye contact and wish them a good day. And if you do that, the Pope says, your own day will improve like a gift from heaven. And it goes on that the narrator is not a reliable narrator. And then she says, rewind. They got the abbreviated version. And she then continues to say what happened. And so that is it. I don't want to give away anything else about the story. I'd like to thank Cody and Gaby and the team who made this book possible. It's very exciting for me. Andrea, like you, this is my first piece of fiction that's been published, which is very exciting for me. Yeah, so thank you, and thank you to the bookstore. That's it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rosalind. Next, we're going to talk to Sarah Chisel. She is one of our editors and has assisted us with this volume. And she's also an extremely talented writer who specializes in speculative fiction, urban fantasy, actually, sorry. And her story, if you'll please unmute yourself, darling. Her story is We Found Love as the Undead. And I'm not going to give you any hints beyond this brief summary. A graffiti artist finds his art to be insufficient solace for his undead girlfriend. So, all right, Sarah.
Okay. Actually, I'm very inspired by the neighborhoods in Los Angeles. So I live very close to Little Tokyo. I love going there. And I have a friend who inspired the story because he was talking to me about, he was always talking to me about his heritage. And I told him, oh, you know, you kind of inspired my story. And since we critique each other's work, he's like, oh no, I'm going to die in the story. Like, I'm sorry, yes, you are. But I mean, the character was not about him in any way, but he knew he had inspired it. He knew the main character was probably going to die. So he definitely helped me with writing the story, basically the vision of it, definitely talking to me about his culture and walking around in little Tokyo with me. So he definitely inspired the story. And I think the story is about transformation and how love transforms us. In this particular story, there's a set of sisters and they love this graffiti artist. So it's not only about romantic love, but it's about familial love as well. And how when those two things are combined in a situation, what a conundrum of fuckery can happen. So I'm going to read you part of it. And since it's zombies transforming, right, they have to transform. They transform physically. They transform, you know, they're on the food chain. They transform in so many different ways. So I'm going to start with how one of the characters basically transforms. He found the strength to look at her. The girl lay motionless in front of the stone garden, her limbs spiraled out of her bent torso like soggy ramen noodles. Her opened eyes gave Satoshi the impression of being lost in the Bermuda Triangle. If you stared at her dilated pupils long enough, you might get lost in their abyss, Satoshi sighed. Satoshi treasured the girl, Akiku, who had always smelled of peonies and fresh midnight sage. She was one of three sisters. Everyone had loved the moon-faced beauties interchangeably. He had learned to love them as if they were one entity. They had been one of the many loves and burdens of Satoshi's life. After slipping on his black dust mask that had a toothy grin with blood dripping fangs printed on it, he touched her cold, rubbery skin with warm fingertips, and she glowed even brighter. He picked up his spray can and aimed it above her body, and then pressed the valve button and began to maneuver his hand and arm with purpose. The can emitted silvery beads of spray that mirrored the essence of Akiku's moonbeam skin. Satoshi grinned at the girl's spray-painted portrait hovered above her body. Wisps of paint trailed down to feather her skin and clothing. The overpowering industrial smell of the can's contents caught in the back of Satoshi's throat. He coughed in spite of wearing a mask as he peered down at her lovingly. The outlines of her round face and full lips were being kissed by the light of the paper lanterns. Her hair appeared like an ink spill, overlapping shadows and hanging slightly in her hooded eyes. The picture moved, smiling and winking at Satoshi as he filled in the curves of her full-figured body. He felt sticky. A layer of fresh sweat formed over him. He stopped spraying and shook the can when the delicate translucent beads of spray splattered unevenly over his curled up fingers. Sparks flew from the can, signaling him to end his painting. His masterpiece began to frown. Akiku's lovely, smooth face rippled, as if a stone were skipped on the surface of a pond or lake. She became rough where she'd been smooth, colorful where she'd been pure light. The twirling glow of the lanterns caught it all. Akiku's lopsided face resembled a colorful lollipop that had been abandoned on the sidewalk to the mercy of the sun. Her limbs bent outward, as if her body could never regain its own balance. Her black hair shivered into a shocking violet color. There was something primal in her permanent sneer. Satoshi felt his spine twitch as he drew back his body. The creation sat up and glared at Satoshi. I get more unfuckable every time you bring me back. This is ruining my love life. That's the... I would like to thank Skylight Books and, having the opportunity to, be a part of Made in LA. It's, such a great pleasure to not only represent my city that I love to write about, but to be such to collaborate with fellow people from Los Angeles who, love the city just as much as I do. So thank you, Skylight Books, and thank everybody here. Thank you.
Very cool. Actually, up on our agenda next, Sarah, we want you to keep the mic for a little longer and share some plans about Volume 4, describe our editorial process and what we're looking for in submissions.
Okay, we're looking for stories set in LA, about the uniqueness of your experiences in LA or anybody's experiences in the City of Angels. And that we basically look for stories that are going to cause a reaction. That's the best way to put it. If it makes us cry, if it makes us shout, if it makes us happy, if the plot and the characters are lovable or miserable, then we will more than likely enjoy reading your story. And just looking for that. And part of our editorial process is just kind of going over reading submissions. And like I said, whatever grabs our attention so far as, being in the heart of LA, having the unique characteristics of different parts of the city and having very unique characters with that we love or despise. Those are a definite must. And definitely looking forward to more events. We're always doing something, always very, very busy, and always looking for great stories set in the city of Los Angeles. So if you love reading books about Los Angeles, which obviously you're here, then that's obviously one of the things you're here for, is to hear great stories about our city. Or even if you're not from Los Angeles and you just want to get a sense of the uniqueness of it, because it's a very unique place, then I would suggest submitting or picking up this book. Because when I first got involved with it, I read the first volume, and it just was, amazing stories. From these stories, you're going to find a little bit of everything for everybody in here. There's speculative fiction, there's, contemporary, there's urban fantasy, there's just, you will find hell mouths, you will find, awkward women dating, you'll find sharks, shark news, you will find just about anything in here, teenage girls that seem sweet but are really, dogs, rescue dogs, you find talking dogs, you'll find all kinds of things in here. And it's just the volume of books are just as diverse as the culture of our city. So I recommend definitely picking up all volumes of this book. But definitely it's something that you don't want to miss. It's excellent. So, and also another part of our editorial is we read the submissions, and we also, I would say just to submit and go ahead and see, just make it about characters that are very pop out, I would say. So thank you, KB.
All right, just took me a second to unmute myself. I wanted to transfer us over to Cody, who is going to do a discussion as well as a Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Gaby. And Sarah, I just wanted to say you probably are you probably have a bit of precognition, because the stories that you have in our volume 3, I think maybe the only ones that feature masks prominently. Satoshi's wearing a mask, and then the story of the 3 and the Kabuki masks also have masks. So, you were writing these, you were seeing the future, and now we're here. So thanks for that. I think in lieu of the Q&A, if we do have some questions, we can answer them, but I do want to hear from Allison, because I screwed up the run of show, and Allison has a story in Made in LA, Volume 3, which is called Night of Fires, and which, paraphrasing off the top of my head, or introducing off the top of my head, is about a young writer who is trying to come up with her sequel memoir and revisits her past to try to mine it for the story, but ends up unearthing more than she bargained for. So, Allison, do you want to tell us a little bit about Night of Fires?
Sure thing, and don't worry about missing it. I'm always late to the party. But yes, thanks again to Skylight Books and everybody for being here. It's very exciting. So my story, Night of Fires, as Cody was explaining, is a bit of a throw. It's a tie between the future and then also the past, about 17 years ago, when the Night of the Fire actually happened, which is the inciting incident that got us into this story in the first place. And one of the things that inspired me to write the story as far as a theme of transformation is, as actually Carter was describing, this is a big city and things tend to move a lot faster than those of us who live here, which I think is very interesting. And I remember my first, days hanging out in LA, I was maybe 20, 21. And the world seems very strange and obscure, and you like all those cool coffee shops and the really back alley places. And then, you come back to the city, revisit some of those old haunts, decade and a half down the road, and even that has changed. And then there's a bit of nostalgia also as to missing those times. And do we miss those times because they are representative of that time period in our life, or are we holding on to it because we're just not familiar or comfortable with the present? And so my story, Night of Fires, it's two sisters that are reliving the night of this fire happened 17 years ago when both of their parents were killed. And the younger sister was there the night. The older sister, who was trying to write her second memoir, was not. And she is following her younger sister in trying to deconstruct another person, her sister's point of view, what happened that night of the fire. And as it turns out, there's a lot of things that the eldest sister didn't realize were not secrets, and were not so easily, the older sister's point of view of the story was very rapidly becoming undone. So I wanted to write a brief thing that kind of mirrors the whole transformation part of things, where it's her visiting a place from the past, and they're watching a film by the woman who found the younger sister wandering the streets. And I'm just going to jump right into it here. It had been years since I'd stepped inside the Vista Theater, a place where the persistent Art Deco theme merged with odd Egyptian busts hung on the walls. While I had thought the exiting crowd marked the end of a feature, the movie was still rolling. Only a handful of people remained in their seats. One man at the front glanced over his shoulder several times, as though wondering if it was more inappropriate for him to stay or to make an awkward exit. Leah sat a couple of seats over from me and leaned forward, eyes trained on the screen. Film was too formal a description. It felt uncomfortably nostalgic, murky and unfocused imagery on glitchy DV video, edited to a 1990s trip-hop record that marked every student film made by a Gen X indie wannabes. The lens seemed magnetically tethered to young Leah, who sat curled on a beaten leather couch in her soot-covered pajamas. The camera's super zoom constantly went in and out. First it focused on Leah's sullen face, then her legs, and a cat that crept closer to her, begging for physical contact. Suddenly, the frame swept across the living room to where tiny drug baggies and cigarette butts were weaved into matted carpet. There was no rhyme or reason for the camera work, nor for the editing, and I couldn't help but feel a swell of relief that the movie would never match the depth of artistry I could put into my book. Skylar wouldn't let me sleep, Leah said. The rhythm of her words matched the pulsing beat of the film soundtrack. Not on purpose. She was 4 days clean, and her nerves were getting to her. She told me the methadone clinic opened at 5 in the morning, but she couldn't wait that long. The next scene had Leah and Skylar in a car. Skylar pointed the camera at herself, and in the yellow streetlights, her pale and clammy face had a strange transparency. Her eye makeup smudged down her cheeks. Skylar's driving was erratic. The frame shook and tilted as she aimed the lens of the front windshield on a hard right turn. When the frame found Leah again, she was gripping onto the door handle. One thing I wanted to capture with this particular part of the story was how we are so intrigued by somebody else's stories, and we want to actually mold those inspirations into something that makes sense to us, but it actually does kind of take away from the truth of that original story. So when we're talking about how the secrets we hold with ourselves and the experiences we as individuals have in the same place, in the same city at the same time, how different they can be, and how paralleling they can be, and how conflicting they can be, and how that is just part of what makes our experience so unique from the other person. So that's Night of Fires.
Thank you, Allison. And I would say, you know, in the order of the anthology, you leave us as the last story in the anthology. You leave us with a very, very hot, bright moment of realization, and that image is just kind of spectacular. So if you haven't read it yet, you don't know what I'm talking about. But so you should probably read it and find out. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us tonight. It's so great to have this opportunity to come together when there are so few opportunities to come together anymore. Thank you so much to Skylight Books for hosting us, for collaborating with us. For those of you watching, thank you for being here. Thanks for sharing your time with us. If you do have some holiday shopping to do for books, definitely do it at Skylight. You can buy Made in LA Volume 3 and 2 and 1 there. And you can buy your other books there too. So thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, AS, Rosalind, Carter, Sarah, Gaby, Allison. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I wish you a good night and a good weekend.
Thank you, Cody.
You can't see my hand, but I'm waiting.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.